There are seriously no good guys in this shutdown. In fact, I think there are no good guys in this Congress. Not a single one. And so while Democrats play dingleberry games and Republicans play chicken, normal people who are just doing their public service jobs are starting to miss paychecks. Members of the military who are living paycheck to paycheck, I am seeing selling stuff in order to pay their bills. Air traffic controllers are taking side gigs, driving Uber and delivering DoorDash in order to get a paycheck, and are starting to call in sick because they're exhausted, which is causing flight delays and cancellations and rerouting. And quite frankly, it's making it less safe for us to fly. And so while Congress dicks around and plays games, we are paying with our livelihoods and our safety. And there's no end in sight.
I am so damn tired of being lied to. I don't think I can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies, but I'm not gonna buy it anymore.
Hello, my friend, and thank you for listening to the 324th episode of Congressional Dish. I'm your host, Jennifer Briney. And today I am going to let you know what happened last month in Congress. So we are going to be talking about September 2025, the month that Congress had to finish their most basic job, funding the government. They were supposed to do that with 12 funding bills. They accomplished 0, but there were also other things going on while they were failing to do their work. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. But in case you don't know, this is kind of a summary episode of 4 episodes that I produced for the people who make this show possible. So thank you if you are one of them. But over on Patreon, I am doing a weekly series the week after Congress is in session called Last Week in Congress. And so this is basically a summary of the most important things from those Last Week in Congress episodes. Although if you do pay for the show and have access to Last Week in Congress, you are going to learn about more than you learn about in these summary episodes. So like you'll learn about bills that are in progress. Today, I'm going to tell you about bills that became law. But if you want to be able to act ahead of time, you should listen to Last Week in Congress. And that's the same for, I looked at amendments that are being attached to must-sign bills like the National Defense Authorization Act. That's the only bill that Congress seems to never fail to make into law every year. And so looking at the amendments, that's another thing that we can get ahead on if you're listening to Last Week in Congress. But I also tell you about hearings that catch my attention. I tell you about national emergencies that the president is continuing because he has to tell Congress when he does that. I tell you about weird days that the Senate declares. So it's like, National Dogs Day, but lately they've been doing them late. I don't know. But there's all kinds of stuff that happens in Congress on a week-to-week basis. And I tell you about absolutely all of it in those bonus episodes over on patreon.com. So please support the show if you want to have access to those. And also, if you want to see my face while I talk about these things, all of the Last Week in Congress episodes are on video. In addition to that, if you support the show and you get that private feed, all of these episodes have the golf swing censor removed. That censor is just for the public episodes because I have a potty mouth, and that potty mouth prevents the show from being aired in kind of a lot of countries, but countries like China and India that have billions of people in them. So I put the golf swing over the bad words. And then also these pitches for funding, they disappear if you're paying for the show. So please support the show on Patreon. Or if you just want to support the show to keep it alive, you can also send in Venmos and PayPals and Zells and Chipotle gift cards and Bitcoin. And we have lots of options for you over on the support the show page on congressionaldish.com. But we don't do advertising here so that you remain our customer as opposed to the corporations being our customer. And so thank you for supporting the show and our work. And so now let's get into what happened last month in Congress. All right, so we did actually have some new laws that were signed in September. So one of them was S201. It's called the ACES Act. And what this law does, it says that the Department of Veterans Affairs has to partner with the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine to study and report on the frequency and deadliness of cancers among veterans who regularly flew in fixed-wing aircraft. Now, this is fine. This passed unanimously in both the House and the Senate. It wasn't controversial at all, but I do feel the need to point out that this adds work to the National Academy of Sciences while its funding is being cut by tens of millions of dollars and while the Trump administration is cutting its staff. So that's not very nice. We also have another bill that became law. This also had to do with veterans. So this is S423, the Pro-Veterans Act of 2025. This one prohibits the Veterans Administration from giving some senior level employees with a critical skill incentive without the approval of certain high-ranking officers. And so critical skill incentives are financial bonuses for employees who have a high-demand skill, a skill for which there is a shortage of people who can perform it. And so now this limits the number of people that can award those incentives. This passed unanimously in the House and the Senate, and Trump signed it into law. Another bill that was signed into law, this was a House bill. This was H.R. 1316, Maintaining American Superiority by Improving Export Control Transparency Act. This one requires a report to Congress. It's no big deal about export licensing for products that can be used for both civilian and military purposes. And the biggest problem that I have with this is this report is allowed to be kept hidden from the public. But it passed unanimously in the House and the Senate, and Trump signed it into law. We also have a new bill that became law that is going to directly affect some of us who are buying homes. And I actually really like this bill. So I'm talking about HR 2808, the Home Buyers Privacy Protection Act. So this has to do with trigger leads. A trigger lead is when you apply for a mortgage or if you refinance your mortgage, and that application triggers the credit bureaus to notify or sell your credit report to other banks who may then try to contact you and, sell you shit. And so what this new law does is it limits when credit reporting agencies can share your credit reports. In general, they will now be prohibited from sharing your credit report unless we have authorized that sharing or if the bank they're sharing it with is a part of the loan somehow. Now, the only problem I have with this one is it's not in effect yet. It goes into effect 180 days after being signed. And so that's going to be March 4th, 2026. I don't know why they felt the need to give these credit reporting agencies and banks 6 more months to sell our information. But this is going to stop in the beginning of next year. So that's nice. And that's it for new laws in September. The biggest news in September was actually all in the Senate, where they confirmed a lot more people to be a part of the Trump administration. And they started the month out doing this the normal way, which is confirming people one by one. And so we did have some people confirmed that way that I just want to put a little red flag on. So one of the people that was confirmed is a guy named Edward Arto. He is the district judge for the Southern District of Florida now. But the reason he caught my attention is this is a guy who was lobbying for himself to be appointed to a judge position by Donald Trump. The reason that he was even on Trump's radar is that he had participated in one of Donald Trump's lawsuits against the media. Specifically, he was on a panel that allowed Trump's case to move forward. And then he wrote a concurrence on Trump's side that criticized our First Amendment protections of the press. So he kind of sided with Trump over the Constitution there, which I don't love. And I also just don't love the clear conflict of interest when it comes to this particular president, considering that this guy was lobbying for himself and then got what, he wanted from Donald Trump. But the Republicans had no problem with this. He was confirmed on a party line with all Republicans saying yes and all Democrats and independents saying no. The Senate also confirmed Robert Law to be the Undersecretary for Strategy, Policy, and Plans at the Department of Homeland Security. My issue with this guy is basically ideological, but he has worked for anti-immigrant organizations, including one which is called FAIR, the Federation for American Immigration Reform, that the Southern Poverty Law Center has designated as a hate group due to its ties to white supremacist organizations. Not great. And that was a bridge too far for Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, who is a Republican. She voted no on this, along with all Democrats and independents. But the rest of the Republicans voted yes. And so he has been confirmed to be one of the heads of the Department of Homeland Security. The Senate also confirmed Maria Lanahan, who is now a U.S. District Judge for the Eastern District of Missouri. And this is a Federalist Society lawyer who Democrats opposed for clearly ideological reasons. So she was involved in trying to ban mifepristone, which is a drug that safely aborts the cluster of cells that could eventually become a fetus. This woman has also worked against collective bargaining rights for workers, and therefore she has lawyered on behalf of corporate bosses. And she has supported policies that limit accountability of law enforcement officers. And so the Democrats were not having that. But they are not empowered right now. The Republicans are. And so she was passed along party lines. All Republicans, yes. All Democrats and independents, no. And then we also have the Senate confirming Stephen Moran as a member of the Fed Board of Governors, as in the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. Now, this guy is finishing another person's term, and so this is a very short-term thing. He is out of this position unless renominated in January of 2026, so he's not in there for long. But the issue is that he is a Trump supporter. He has, and not just a supporter, but like has donated to Trump's campaigns. He has said that he is a supporter of Trump's tariffs and he wants the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates, which when I look at why they would want that, when you lower interest rates, it generally incentivizes people to invest in the stock market to chase higher interest income. But basically, I see this as a conflict of interest as a Trump loyalist because the Federal Reserve is supposed to be an independent agency. But this guy is just not independent to the point that like he's on President Trump's White House team. This guy, Stephen Moran, is the chair of Trump's Council on Economic Advisors, which is a Senate-confirmed position. And he refused to resign from that position when he became a member of the Federal Reserve. Instead, he took a leave of absence. So he's essentially holding two positions at once, one serving Donald Trump and one that's supposed to be independent. You can't really do two things at once. Lisa Murkowski, senator from Alaska, once again could not stomach this. She voted no, along with all the Democrats and independents, but the other Republicans outnumbered them, and so he is now on the Federal Reserve Board. And then finally, the last confirmation that was done the proper way was Michael Waltz. You might remember this guy. He is the former congressman turned Donald Trump's national security advisor, who became famous earlier this year because he was conducting war planning conversations over Signal and included a journalist in the chat. Whoopsie daisy. And so, having done a terrible job, he left that position on May 1st. And on the very same day, President Trump nominated him to be our UN ambassador. So he's going to be representing us to the world, which got me to thinking if Michael Waltz is no longer the national security advisor, who is? Because I haven't seen anyone else confirmed. And it turns out that our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is also acting national security advisor. He's doing both. And the only other time this has happened in U.S. history is when President Nixon had Henry Kissinger doing both of those jobs at one time. This is concerning to me because Marco Rubio is a warmonger, and he specifically wants to overthrow the government of Venezuela. We saw this back in the first Trump administration when Marco Rubio was on the Senate, I believe, Foreign Relations Committee. So him having that much power in the Trump administration and us seeing President Trump blowing up boats full of random Venezuelans off of the coast of Venezuela. He has moved our military assets off of the coast of Venezuela. There are a lot of signs that we're about to go to war with Venezuela, and Marco Rubio being national security advisor, it checks out. It checks out. Getting back to Michael Waltz, though, our former national security advisor, when he was confirmed to be our UN ambassador, as far as Republicans go, all of them voted yes, except for Rand Paul of Kentucky. And as far as Democrats and independents go, all of them voted no, except for John Fetterman of Pennsylvania and Mark Kelly of Arizona, who said yes to Michael Waltz representing us to the world. That seemed a little weird to me, but he's now confirmed. Is what it is. Now, the reason that I was saying stuff like this guy was the last one confirmed the proper way is because the Senate Republicans then voted to break with longstanding Senate rules related to the filibuster in order to get Trump's nominees confirmed a whole lot faster. So real quick, the filibuster is a rule in the Senate. It's not a law. This is a Senate rule that essentially allows the minority party to stop votes from happening unless 60 senators or more approve of moving forward. And not everything's able to be filibustered. The rule is complicated. But what you need to know here is that Democrats have been using the filibuster to slow down the confirmation of Donald Trump's appointees, even though the filibuster doesn't give the Democrats the ability to stop the confirmation. So they're basically using it as a slowing down technique. And so the Senate Republicans decided to vote to change the rules of the Senate to allow confirmations to be voted on as a group instead of one by one. And so let's take a look at this because it's kind of a big deal. It's a breaking of longstanding precedent. And so here's Senator John Thune of South Dakota. He is the Senate Majority Leader, as in the head of the Senate and the head of the Republicans. And here he is on the Senate floor explaining why the Republicans were making this change.
Mr. President, the Democrat leader correctly stated, and again I quote, "For decades, Democrats and Republicans have regularly cooperated to swiftly confirm the many individuals selected by each president to serve in their administration," end quote. Now, on a practical level, that's looked like expediting individual nominees and blocks of nominees by using unanimous consent or voice vote, which a way, as you know here in the Senate, Mr. President, of moving things along more quickly. During President George H.W. Bush's 4 years in office and President Clinton's first 4 years, both presidents had 98% of their civilian nominees, get this, 98% confirmed through unanimous consent or voice vote. George W. Bush, President Bush, and President Obama both had 90% of their civilian nominees confirmed by unanimous consent or voice vote in their first terms.
Now, I just want to point out real quick there that when we got to George W. Bush and Obama, he changed the timeline. He said 90% of their people in their first terms. That's 4 years long. You know, the 1990s was a different time. A lot of this was done by unanimous consent. Everything changed after that. There was a lot more slowing down of the process. And so, you know, Thune's playing with timelines here in a way. I think what you need to know is that throughout my lifetime, the confirmation process has gotten a lot slower because of the filibuster. So let's let him continue.
And then we get to President Trump's first administration. Democrats, upset at the president's election, introduced an unprecedented new level of partisanship into the historically bipartisan confirmation process, forcing time-consuming votes on civilian nominees who would once have gone by unanimous consent or by voice vote. But even so, Mr. President, despite this new level of partisanship introduced by Democrats, both President Trump in his first term and President Biden had more than half of their nominees confirmed by unanimous consent or voice vote. Well, fast forward to today. President Trump has been in office for 8 months, and he has not had one single civilian nominee confirmed by unanimous consent or voice vote. Not one. Democrats have dragged out the process of every single nominee. Even on nominees they ended up voting for by large margins.
And on last week in Congress, we have confirmed that that is true. They have slowed people down. And then there were also people that got confirmed with votes that made them seem controversial when they weren't. So like, here's an example. We have a new Assistant Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. His name is Benjamin DiMarzo. And no one seemed to have any reason to oppose his nomination because of anything he said or did. Instead, Democrats obstructed his nomination because they wanted the Trump administration to be more responsive to Congress. Well, that's not that guy's fault. We also had Christopher Dudek. He's a district judge for the Middle District of Florida. And he had represented law enforcement officers in civil rights lawsuits, but that's not that bad. There was really no organized opposition to him. And so only Senator Peter Welch of Vermont, he was the only Democrat who voted yes on this confirmation because he said that Christopher Dudek is competent, but the rest of the Democrats voted no. And we've seen this with quite a few other nominations during last week in Congress. Now, we will say that these examples have been outnumbered by the number of unqualified Trump loyalists and people with brazen conflicts of interest who have been confirmed to positions across our government. But Thune is not wrong. The Democrats are obstructing people even when they are sensible nominees. This is a real thing that is happening. So just know that. So let's go back to John Thune.
Empty desks do not help the government function, and unnecessary delays rob a duly elected president of the team he needs to carry out his responsibilities. Dragging out confirmations also ties up the Senate floor. As the senior senator from Minnesota said last year, in what I would say were much less dire confirmation circumstances, and I quote, "As the Senate spends more of its time working on nominations, this leaves less time for legislating on issues that are important to the American people," end quote.
Which is precisely why the Democrats are doing it, because when the Republicans have the time in the Senate to pass legislation, they pass things like the One Big Beautiful Bill, which is something that is, they legalized indefinite detention of anyone, and they also are going to take healthcare away from millions of people. So this is what the Republicans are doing with their time. And so it is a way to jam up the Senate so the Republicans can get less done. It is a part of the strategy.
To clear the current backlog of nominees on the calendar and in committee, we would need to take another 600 votes before the end of the year. Now, let me just repeat that to put it into context. To clear the current backlog of nominees on the calendar and in committee, we would need to take another 600 votes. Now, to put that number in perspective, that's more votes than this record-breaking Senate has taken all year up until now. And again, that's just for nominations that have already been sent to Congress, not those that are going to be forwarded and that we're going to have to process here additionally on top of the 600 votes between now and the end of the year. There literally are hundreds more nominations to come from the administration. So this afternoon I'll be taking the necessary procedural steps to amend the rules. It is an idea, as I said earlier, with a Democrat pedigree. The senior Democrat senator from Minnesota, along with her colleague in the Democrat caucus, the junior senator from Maine, made a similar proposal in 2023, which would have codified in Senate rules the longtime Senate precedent of en bloc nominations, of moving nominations in groups. Our measure is not as extensive, I should say, as that of my Democrat colleagues. It only applies to nominees at the sub-cabinet level and not to Article III judicial nominees as theirs did. But the proposals share the same objective, and that is providing for confirming groups of nominees all together so the President can have his team in place and so the Senate can focus on the important legislative work in its charge. Or to quote the senior Democrat from Minnesota on her very similar proposal, and I quote again, "This common sense reform will help improve efficiency and make sure we're able to fill positions that are vital to our national security, economic success, and more," end quote. This historic obstruction ends now. Democrats have destroyed Senate precedent, and we're going to fix it. Fix it and ensure that in the future, duly elected presidents of both parties are able to get their teams in place without unnecessary delay so that they can fulfill their responsibilities to the American people.
And that is the consequence, because the Republicans just started this and the Democrats will be able to do it the next time they have power. And so it is what it is. The Republicans did successfully change the rules, and so they decided to confirm 48 people with one vote. And it was a party line vote, so all Republicans, yes, all Democrats and independents, no. And so I looked at that list of people to see, were there a bunch of partisan monsters in there, or were these generally uncontroversial people? Now, I will say that most of the people, I didn't see anything wrong with them or their backgrounds. But there were some people in there that I think we need to be aware got snuck in as a part of this group. So one of the people that I I'm not happy is in our government, is now Dario Gil. He's our Undersecretary for Science at the Department of Energy. So this position is one that has him in charge of oversight of the Department of Energy research, and he's someone who's going to approve funding. So he gets to set the Department of Energy's research priorities. Well, the problem with that is that Dario Gil was the senior vice president and director of research at IBM, where he was focused on AI. And he has talked publicly about his intense loyalty to IBM, where he worked for over 2 decades. Now, he has promised to divest from his IBM stock holdings by mid-December. But IBM's stock has increased 20% in just the last month, and he has been able to benefit from that when already in office. And some of that increase might be because the Trump administration announced that IBM is one of 2 companies that are finalists for the contract to overhaul our entire air traffic control system. Now, that announcement is expected to be made by the end of October, so we'll know who's winning it. But if that happens, Dario Gil might possibly still have his stock in IBM when the announcement is made. And if IBM is the winner, well, then so is Dario Gil. So the point I'm trying to make is that a 20-plus year employee with intense loyalty to IBM is being given effective control of the Department of Energy's research. He's allowed to keep his IBM stock for 3 months while on the job. And it just seems to me that the conflict of interest for this guy is crystal clear. But he was able to get confirmed along with 47 other people. We also had Brandon Williams, Undersecretary for Nuclear Security, confirmed in this manner. And this is an extremely important role in our government. The Undersecretary for Nuclear Security is a Department of Energy agency with 65,000 employees and contractors, with a budget of $25 billion, and it's in charge of maintaining the safety of our nuclear weapons. And so the Senate just confirmed Brandon Williams to be one of the main people in charge of that. And this guy he's a former MAGA member of the House of Representatives, where he served 1 term from 2023 to 2025. And he lost his reelection. And so Trump picked him to oversee the design, production, maintenance, and upgrades to our nuclear weapons stockpile. And here's the real problem. Brandon Williams has a bachelor's degree in liberal arts from Pepperdine University, and he got his master's in business administration, which means he has no formal education in engineering or physics or chemistry, which are the degrees you would hope that the person in charge of our nuclear weapons would have. And on top of that, he doesn't have much experience with nuclear weapons either. The experience that Brandon Williams touts as qualifying him to oversee our nuclear weapons stockpile is that he worked on a nuclear submarine while in the Navy from 1991 to 1996. But since he left the Navy almost 30 years ago, Brandon Williams has used his business degrees to become a Citibank investment banker and tech investor, which seems entirely appropriate considering his education choices. But he has done nothing at all in the weapons security space. And that doesn't seem like enough experience for this job for me, and I know I'm not alone. Stephen Young, the senior Washington representative for the Global Security Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists, said, quote, "Putting Brandon Williams in this job is like putting someone who used to be a steward on an airplane in charge of making an aircraft while also making the factory to make the aircraft. It is a massive job, and he has no remote qualifications for doing it," unquote. And yet he was confirmed by the Republicans in a mass vote as one of 48 nominees. Also confirmed in this manner was Leslie Beyer, the Assistant Secretary of the Interior. Until confirmation, Leslie was the CEO of a lobbying organization for the oil and gas industry. And now she's going to oversee the Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, and the Office of Surface Mining. And I wonder what kind of energy she's going to prioritize. Also confirmed was Kyle Houstveit. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but who cares? He is the Assistant Secretary of Energy for Fossil Energy, and he was an executive at Devon Energy, a large natural gas producer who will now be in charge of the agency that approves gas export applications. Also in that group, Scott Hutchins was confirmed to be our Undersecretary of Agriculture for Research, Education, and Economics. Now, this is the chief scientist position at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And the main job is to ensure that the USDA science is independent, peer-reviewed, and transparent. And so in that role, Scott Hutchins is in charge of funding and priorities at the Agricultural Research Service, the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, the Economic Research Service, and National Agricultural Statistics Service, which is why it is concerning that Scott Hutchins has spent 30 years of his career at Dow Chemical. Put another way, a pesticide executive is now in charge of approving pesticides. The Republicans also snuck in Michael Kadnazi, who is now our Assistant Secretary of Defense for Industrial-Based Policy. Now, he was the owner of a small company that sold war-related products to the government, and he was a defense consultant who helped large companies get Department of Defense contracts. And now he's in a position to decide who gets those contracts. I wonder if he might help out his former clients. The Republicans also decided, as a part of this group, to confirm Michael Obadal, who's our now Undersecretary of the Army. Now, Michael Obadal at least has 27 years of experience in the Army, and he has a master's in national security policy from the Naval War College, and so he has plenty of experience. And he also has private sector experience. He was on the board of directors at Anduril, which is a private defense company that sells drones and other death machines to the military. In that role, he collected between $250,000 and $500,000. We don't know exactly because elites are allowed to report these things in wide ranges. But let's just say he has a lot of money's worth of Anduril stock. And because Anduril is not a publicly traded company, he can't just sell that stock, and he didn't promise to try to do so. So basically, this dude will likely make money off of contracts awarded to Anduril. And that is clearly a conflict of interest. And yet, he was confirmed, along with 47 other people. And I do want to warn you that the Senate Republicans have already voted to do this again. But the next time they do this in October, it's going to be for over 100 nominees at once. And so next month, I will look through that list and tell you who got snuck in with that gigantic group. And so that's it for actual work that got done in Congress in September. But there was more things to tell you about, such as stupid fucking drama. And a lot of the drama had to do with the censure attempts that happened in the House of Representatives. And so a censure is basically an official record saying that someone in the House of Representatives did something really, 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 really wrong. And this has only happened like a handful of times in US history. It is a real mark on someone's record in a negative way. And there are people right now in the House of Representatives who are trying to abuse their censure power for political reasons. One of them is Clay Higgins, and he's one of the dumbest people in the House of Representatives. I have this confirmed by people who actually know the man. But this dum-dum tried to censure LaMonica McIver for what went down at the New Jersey Detention Center. So basically, LaMonica McIver, who's a Democratic member of Congress, she and other members of Congress surrounded the mayor of Newark, New Jersey, as they were all trying to get into an ICE detention center. And the reason they were trying to do that is that members of Congress are legally required to be let in when they arrive to these facilities unannounced, but the mayor is not. So there were a bunch of Department of Homeland Security agents who were attempting to arrest the mayor for trying to conduct oversight in his city along with our members of Congress. Now, all of this was caught on video, and you can see that there was a lot of shoving going on, but you can't really see LaMonica McIver do anything other than try to not get shoved by these agents. Yeah, she was a part of it. She was in that scuffle, but I did not see her do anything remotely close to assaulting any officers. But there was an interim U.S. attorney, a former personal lawyer for Donald Trump, who brought charges against LaMonica McIver for slamming her forearms against law enforcement. And these are charges that could send her to prison for 17 years. And so Clay Higgins decided to try to censure her for this as well. But all of the Democrats, along with 5 Republicans, did kill that censure attempt. But even though she didn't get officially censured, it does appear to me that the main goal was achieved because Democrats in Congress have stopped trying to force their way into ICE facilities. And maybe the threat of 17 years in prison is a part of that. We also had an even more stupid censure attempt by Nancy Mace against Ilhan Omar. Now, Nancy Mace is a Republican. She's also, I am on record saying, I'm pretty sure she was a despicable human being. And she was trying to censure Ilhan Omar, but I couldn't quite figure out why. And so we went to the floor of the House of Representatives, where she gave a speech and she told us why she was censuring Omar. And so I want you to hear it from Nancy Mace herself for why she thinks Ilhan Omar deserved to go down in history as someone who did something very, very wrong in Congress.
Whereas on September 11th, 2025, one day after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, Representative Ilhan Omar gave an interview on Zateo's town hall with Mehdi Hassan in which she smeared Charlie Kirk and implied he was to blame for his own murder. Whereas on September 12th, 2025, 2 days after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, Representative Ilhan Omar reposted a video on X, formerly known as Twitter, which disparaged the character of Charlie Kirk and those mourning his death. Whereas the video Representative Ilhan Omar reposted on X states Charlie Kirk is dead, and before the body got cold, the far right propped his corpse up as a cudgel for their holy war. Whereas the video Representative Ilhan Omar reposted on X further states, don't be fooled. These people don't give a single shit about Charlie Kirk. They are just using his death to further their Christo-fascist agenda. Whereas the video Representative Ilhan Omar reposted on X further states Charlie Kirk was a reprehensible human being. He enacted his political agenda by preying on weak-minded people. He took complex socioeconomic issues and simplified them by pointing fingers at outgroups, demonizing those groups, and sicking his massive following on them. Whereas the video Representative Ilhan Omar reposted on X further states Charlie Kirk was a stochastic terrorist, an adamant transphobe. He denied the genocide happening in Palestine. He believed the subjugation of women, and in his last dying words, he was spewing racist dog whistles. Whereas the video Representative Ilhan Omar reposted on X further states Charlie Kirk was Dr. Frankenstein, and his monster shot him through the neck. Whereas the video Representative Ilhan Omar reposted on X further blames Charlie Kirk for his own murder. Whereas Clause 1 of Rule 13 of the Rules of the House of Representatives provides a member, delegate, resident commissioner, officer, or employee of the House shall behave at all times in a manner that shall reflect credibility on the House. Whereas Representative Ilhan Omar's actions in the wake of the assassination of Charlie Kirk are reprehensible and affect the dignity and integrity of the proceedings of the House and do not reflect the credibility on the House. Now, therefore, be it resolved that Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota be censured. Representative Ilhan Omar forthwith present herself in the well of the House of Representatives for the pronouncement of censure. Representative Ilhan Omar be censured with the public reading of this resolution by the Speaker, and Representative Ilhan Omar be and is hereby removed from the Committee on Education and Workforce and removed from the Committee on the Budget of the House.
So she not only wanted to censure Representative Omar, but get her removed from the committee for a retweet that she didn't like. And the censure resolution failed, but it only failed by one. 214 members of the House voted against it, but 213 voted for it. And these were partisan lines, except 4 Republicans said no, along with all the Democrats, and saved Omar from getting in trouble for a retweet. Now, this was a different group of Republicans than the ones that voted to stop the censure of LaMonica McIver. Mike Flood of Nebraska was the only Republican to vote with Democrats to stop both of those stupid censures. And this group of 4 said that they voted to stop the censure because it's clearly a First Amendment issue. So that's what your House was doing instead of funding the government. Speaking of the House of Representatives, we also were supposed to have one more person in the House of Representatives before the government shut down. So Adelita Grijalva won a special election to replace her father who died in office, and she won that election on September 23rd. Now, I'm recording this on October 10th, and as of this date, Speaker Mike Johnson has still not sworn her into office. And in case you're wondering, the fact that the House of Representatives has been out of office since the last week of September, that is not an excuse. Because earlier this year, when 2 Republicans won special elections, they were sworn into office the next day during a so-called pro forma session. Those are the sessions that happen when Congress is at home. And so we've had over 3 weeks now of pro forma sessions, and she has still not been seated. Now, there are 2 reasons for this. 1, clearly shameless partisanship. But 2, a lot of us think it has to do with the Epstein discharge petition. Because right now, there is a petition that has almost all the signatures it needs to force a vote in the House of Representatives on making the Jeffrey Epstein files public. Now, what these discharge petitions do is it says that this vote has to happen against the wishes of Speaker of the House and Trump ass licker Mike Johnson. He wants to prevent that. But right now, all the Democrats who have been seated, along with 4 Republicans, Tom Massey of Kentucky, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, and Nancy Mace, they have all signed the petition, and all of them together equal 217 signatures. So if they were to seat Adelita Grijalva, who we know is going to sign the petition, that would be the 218th signature, and you need 218 to force that vote. And so that's one of the reasons that we think that she is still sitting on the sidelines in Congress despite winning that election. But it is incredibly shameful, even for Mike Johnson, to refuse her seat. There is so much shameful going on in this Congress, which brings me to the shutdown, which is happening because Congress failed to finish a single government funding bill on time. All 12 of them were due by September 30th. And I must say, because the Republicans controlled the House and the Senate, that failure is a Republican failure. But to extend their deadline, the House Republicans passed a bill that simply funds the government at the old levels until mid-November. I read it. It's clean. There is nothing crazy attached to it. On its own merits, there is no reason why the Democrats should be opposing that bill. But the reason they are opposing that bill is that the Democrats are taking a page out of the Republican playbook from like 2013 and 2018, all the prior shutdowns. Because the Democrats this time are trying to get partisan priorities to hitchhike their way into law. They are using functional government as leverage to get what they want, something they said was completely unacceptable behavior every time the Republicans have tried it in the past. And it is a strategy that has never worked for the Republicans when they tried it. But despite all of those historical failures, the Democrats are hoping it will work for them. The hypocrisy of the Democrats right now is just stunning. And so what are the dingleberries that the Democrats are trying to get hitchhiked into law? Well, you can read them for yourself in their Senate bill. It is S2882. It's only 64 pages. It won't take you long. But their bill, which would only fund the government until the end of October, has these dingleberries in it. So first, Section 2142. This is the one that you're hearing about. This would permanently extend the higher COVID-era health insurance subsidies for people who buy their own health insurance. But they also included Section 2141, which repeals the One Big Beautiful Bill's Medicaid provisions. It repeals the whole subtitle of them. Over 30 provisions would just be gone. They also included Section 154, which provides funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is something that the Republicans wanted to and did successfully defund. And then the biggest one, if you look at Section 111, 118, 119, and 143 together, those limit the authority for the Office of Management and Budget Director, Russell Vought, to withhold funds. And this is the real fight. Because Congress is appropriating money and the Trump administration, at the direction of Russell Vought, is refusing to spend it. But the point I am trying to make here is that those are big, juicy dingleberries. These are significant asks, with the One Big Beautiful Bill repeals, the Medicaid repeals, and the handcuffs that they want to place on Russell Vought being the most significant. But if you were to just listen to the Democrats, you would reasonably believe that they only have one ask, which is the extension of the Affordable Care Act subsidies. And as a result, this is how the shutdown is being explained to the American people by journalists who don't bother to read bills. And so here is a local television news segment that I randomly picked from many similar segments. This one happens to be from WOWK 13 in West Virginia, but this is how the shutdown drama is being framed all over the country.
The federal government shutdown is centered around a couple of things, but the sticking point here is about the Affordable Care Act enhanced premium tax credits and how they play a role.
And 13 News reporter Savannah Young joins us now live in studio to break it all down for us. Good evening, Savannah.
Local leaders say nearly 70,000 West Virginians' affordable health care coverage may be at risk, as tax credits rolled out during the COVID-19 pandemic are set to expire by December 31st. Affordable Care Act subsidies were not the only reason for the shutdown. It was caused by Congress not passing a spending bill by the end of the fiscal year, September 30th. Senate Republicans pushed a short-term funding bill that did not include an extension of the ACA enhanced tax credits. Senate Democrats blocked that legislation, calling for inclusion of the subsidy extension as part of any funding deal.
Take note that there was no mention of the Democrats' attempt to refund the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. There was no mention of the Democrats' attempt to repeal the One Big Beautiful Bill Medicaid provisions. There was no mention of the biggie, the Democrats' attempt to legally force Russell Vought and the Trump administration to provide agencies with the money that Congress has appropriated. No mention that the Democrats are attempting to overturn some of the Republicans' most impactful so-called achievements. But the thing is, I can't really blame these TV anchors for this because this is what they are being told. Although it really isn't all that hard to fact check this information. It took me 5 minutes of skimming through the bill to see that the Democrats were making more demands than what they were saying. But as for the Democrats, my guess, strategically, for why the Democrats are only talking about the subsidies is because Democrats do tend to think that we Americans are just too stupid to grasp nuance. So in this case, the nuance of the Medicaid cuts and the nuance of separation of powers. And so they are hoping that Americans will get so fired up about the subsidies costing us dum-dums more money that the Republicans will be forced to pass the Senate Democrats' bill and that the other dingleberries, the more impactful ones, can essentially be snuck into law because of public pressure. But the thing is that the Republicans in the Senate, they know that a major rollback of what they consider accomplishments are attached to the Senate Democrats' bill. And so I don't think Senate Republicans are going to budge on this. And even if they did, the Republicans in the House are still gone. So if there was any change to either of those bills, the House Republicans, they're just on vacation. They're not around to vote on anything that could be negotiated in the Senate. And the game that is being played here is that House Republicans are playing legislative chicken. Because after they passed the clean funding bill that would just fund the government until mid-November, they left town and haven't come back. The House hasn't worked for 3 weeks as of this recording. And let's keep in mind the real reason all of this is happening. It is because Congress didn't finish a single funding bill. And they still have to finish those. The Republicans and Democrats' bills are just designed to buy them more time to finish their homework. Time that has been passing while the Republicans in the House have been fucking around at home. There are seriously no good guys in this shutdown. In fact, I think there are no good guys in this Congress. Not a single one. And so while Democrats play dingleberry games and Republicans play chicken, normal people who are just doing their public service jobs are starting to miss paychecks. Members of the military who are living paycheck to paycheck, I am seeing selling stuff in order to pay their bills. Air traffic controllers are taking side gigs, driving Uber and delivering DoorDash in order to get a paycheck, and are starting to call in sick because they're exhausted, which is causing flight delays and cancellations and rerouting. And quite frankly, it's making it less safe for us to fly. And so while Congress dicks around and plays games, we are paying with our livelihoods and our safety. And there's no end in sight. You know, I've been doing this job for 13 years. I've been studying Congress for 13 years. And I keep saying that we've hit a new low. But this shutdown, this one is so unnecessary and the messaging so deceptive from both parties. Once again, we've hit a new low. And I don't know how this one ends without someone or a lot of someone's getting very hurt and forcing Congress to stop fucking around. And so that's it for September. Like I said, the House of Representatives in October has been MIA, but the Senate has been in session. And so to hear all of the updates in closer to real time, please support Congressional Dish on Patreon and listen to Last Week in Congress. And if you're happy with these monthly summaries, great. Thanks for listening. And I'll update you again next month. Now, this is where I usually like to tell you about our new executive producers, but for this episode, we don't have any. But if you want to become an executive producer and be announced on the next episode, executive producers get to put their name on an episode of your choice, which not only lends that episode your vouch, but also moves it up the most valuable episodes list, which is where I send all new listeners to get the most important information that we have produced here on Congressional Dish. The cost is $535 for each executive producer credit. And that is what makes these episodes literally the most valuable. And so, since we have a second here, I do want to let you know we have the top 3. Right now, there's only one episode in the number 1 spot, and that is War Money. That is the episode that was the hardest for me to produce, quite frankly, emotionally. But I took 2 months to learn about the history of Israel and Palestine. And in War Money, that is where I give you that history. That was produced, I want to say, a couple months after October 7th, 2023. And as I am recording this, I am happy to say that the bombs have finally, 2 years later, stopped falling on Gaza. And there are thousands and thousands of people as I speak who are walking from the south back to the north. And God only knows what they're going to find there. But the bombs have stopped. And apparently the gates are going to open and food and medicine is going to be allowed in. I'm also hoping, because they're saying that very soon the remaining hostages will all be released. And so at least there's not much good news happening here, but I consider that good news over in Israel and Gaza. But if you want to know why all of that was happening to begin with, War Money is your episode. We also have 6 executive producers on 2 different episodes that are tied for second. So Contriving January 6th, which I like to call my masterpiece. I took the testimony from all, I think, 22-ish hours from the January 6th committee, and I got that into a tight 2 hours and really telling you the plot that Donald Trump and his minions tried to execute to keep him president in 2020. It was quite sinister, especially the faking of election certifications and trying to get fake documents used on January 6th to keep him president. It's a bonkers story and you should listen to it. And then also tied with that episode is WTF is the Federal Reserve, because most of us don't know what that is. And then tied for third is the Minerals Are the New Oil episode and the episode explaining the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a part of our State Department, which is quite regime changing and which most Americans don't even know exists. But one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up is that the Big Beautiful Bill episode, the first one, which I do think is the most important because that's the one that talks about the indefinite detention that was legalized, that one right now is tied for 4th. And so if we do want more people to know about that indefinite detention, maybe we move that up with some EP credits. But that is in your control, not mine. But right now it's tied for 4th. A couple more would bring it into the top 3 positions. All right. The next episode, I think, is kind of hopeful. I mean, as hopeful as we can get in these times. I was pleased to see that in the Senate, there are some signs now that the Republicans are starting to investigate the Trump administration, because the Republicans had confirmed a director of the Centers for Disease Control, and 1 month later, she got fired with a combination of RFK Jr. and Donald Trump. And so she was brought in to testify. What was that all about? And she was brought in by Senate Republicans. And so it's the first time 9 months into this administration that I've seen any signs that Congress intends to do its constitutional duty and police the Trump administration. And it was a fascinating hearing. The next episode is going to be the highlights from that hearing. And I also consider that kind of a mea culpa because after Trump was elected, I was looking for any silver lining. And I thought maybe RFK Jr. would be it because I have long been worried about what is in our food supply. And I thought maybe he would clean that up. And so I made those episodes and I was like, maybe RFK Jr. won't be the worst. And that didn't work out so well. So yeah, I will tell you what's going on there by giving that testimony to you. But yeah, I would like to thank Claire, who's my production and research assistant, for helping with all of these episodes. I'd like to thank Mike at Pro Podcast Solutions for doing our editing. I'd like to thank Mark at podcastbranding.co for doing our web design and security. I'd like to thank my sister Lauren for doing my bookkeeping and for taking care of our executive producers. I'd like to thank my dad for being my biggest fan and my tax dude. And of course, as always, I'd like to thank Brian Karras. He was our artist for a very long time. He is now departed, but he is always a part of this team. All right, that's it for today. Try and stay sane. I'm playing in a week-long volleyball tournament, so wish me luck. And if you want more updates again, sign up on Patreon, and I will talk to you soon on Last Week in Congress. All right, take care. Bye.
We're surrounded now by liars coming at us through our TV screens.
We don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite the many in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if a lie is alright if the end will justify the means. Now we are so damn tired of being lied to.
The polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. We are so damn tired of being lied to.
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. Now we're not keeping quiet.
These bills represent common sense, bipartisan solutions that actually solve problems.